Hey, and welcome to the Hoppitarian Show. I am Shane. You can follow me on Twitter at the Hoppitarian. Please subscribe to our YouTube, Odyssey, and BitChute channels. And also, please leave a 5-star rating on iTunes for our show if you do enjoy this. And if you write a review, please tell us how much you love the Hoppa ethno state. That'll really help us out a lot. My guest today is Joshua Ferguson. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. So for those who are not familiar with you and your work, tell the people a little about yourself.
So I am mostly a malcontent. That's what we call ourselves locally in local politics. I took a break from it for a while, but I do local political news, dealing with my city, county, what have you. And then I have a podcast, much like every libertarian that exists ever in the history of ever, known as The Hourly Struggle. It's mostly on YouTube, and I spend more of my time over on TikTok because there aren't that many libertarians over there. So yeah, just trying to talk about various issues and explain liberty a little bit more to people who may not be used to it.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit before we started recording about TikTok and how that whole TikTok algorithm works. And can you kind of explain that? Because, yeah, like you said, there aren't a lot, as far as I know, and as far as you know, probably that, like you said, there aren't a lot of libertarians or those people on TikTok. So like I was basically saying, well, I think a lot of them believe, and I don't know if it's true or not, I have no idea, but they think it's a Chinese psyop, and they think, oh, China is this, China is the boogeyman. They're using TikTok to kind of manipulate us, whatever. And again, what do I know? I have no idea. But so like, what's your experience on that?
Okay, so I started using TikTok for no other reason than I wasn't getting traction on other platforms because, and this is sort of the rebuttal to that. So I hear that from libertarians often, where they'll say things like, "Oh, well, it's just a dancing app, or it's a Chinese psyop to keep us stupid, or whatever." I'm like, yes, so's Facebook, so's YouTube, so's Instagram. Like they're all that. And the difference between the Chinese government possibly spying on you versus the NSA is immaterial to me, unless you're, Uncle Ted or somebody. You probably shouldn't be worrying about it too much. And so you have this issue where if you want to get more viewers, want to get more growth, want to spread the message of liberty, you go to places that people are paying attention. You go to where the audience is. And I was on Twitter and didn't have a huge following on that. Facebook had yeeted my platform. I was getting my own followers weren't seeing my content. I wasn't growing on YouTube. And I have a very small channel. I mean, my YouTube channel is really, really very small because I don't use it a lot. And when I went to TikTok, I went from 0 to 50,000 followers in a relatively short amount of time, which gained me over 100% growth on my YouTube channel, despite posting nothing on YouTube. So people were interested enough in what I was saying there to follow me down channel to other things and ask for more longer content and more and more data, more points, more whatever. And that's what you should be doing if you're trying to spread the message of liberty, is find the platform that works for you. The TikTok algorithm is super weird and it changes like every other algorithm, every other system, but it feeds your content. I'll give you actually a really good example if this makes sense. It's the opposite of what Instagram was. And what I mean by that is on Instagram, you couldn't share, you could like private message it, but there was no way to share someone's post. So like Twitter has the retweet or quote retweet. Facebook, you could share things. Instagram had none of that. You posted your picture, you used your hashtags, and it was up to people to find you. And that's just, it was impossible for small creators, which is why giant corporations and brands and all of that sort of always stayed on top. Name brand celebrities always stayed on top of that for the most part. TikTok takes everything and feeds it based on interest. So the more people like something, the more people share something, the more people see it. And it'll, as long as you sort of tread the community guidelines as best you can and try not to get yeeted off the platform, which can be difficult, you end up with a system that just pushes your video to more people. I have videos on there that had, they're minute long, 3-minute long videos, whatever, but have 100,000, 300,000. I have one video that's almost at 500,000 views, just because as more people see it, it gets fed to more people. It sort of comes back to life, gets fed to more people still. So, I mean, the whole reason I went on there was because I was like, hey, these other platforms aren't working, might as well try that one. And it reaches more people. So I think you're right. I think a lot of libertarians, more conservatives than anything, but a lot of libertarians are like, oh, that's a Chinese spyware app. And I don't even think China owns it anymore. I thought it was like a division of Microsoft or somebody was going to buy it for the US version. But yeah, okay, they may be spying on me. So's Apple. So's Google. So is every game on your phone. I mean, they're all data brokering your data, so kind of who cares? And if you're trying to spread a message, use what works. If Odyssey works best for you, use that. For me right now, it's TikTok. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's those are good points. And yeah, it definitely makes sense. Like you said, if it's working for you, then why not use it? I mean, for some people it's Twitter, and for you it's TikTok. So I mean,
And there's no right way to use these platforms. I mean, different people have successes different ways. Some people have success, and it is a funny thing about that app platform is you'll have all these people that are like, "This is how you gain all these followers." I'm like, I have 3 times your followers, and I did none of that. So no, you just find what works for you and go from there.
you should just for like one TikTok video, just like do some kind of dance. You're dancing for whatever, dancing like one of your favorite songs or something, just to see what would happen.
Harry Carey, that's what would happen. I would.
Hi everybody.
Yeah, I would
So
die of shame. But continue,
yeah.
continue.
But yeah, so speaking of things that apparently are working or maybe not working, I don't know. So one of the reasons that I wanted you on the show is because you did do a TikTok video, and then you made a longer YouTube video. And the whole premise of it, the gist of it, was that the Libertarian Party has apparently abandoned California. So, Josh, has the Libertarian Party abandoned California? What do you think?
Yes, they have. So what I did is what happened? I can explain it for your viewers or listeners and what have you. Is I got my primary election ballot piece in the mail that shows every statewide office that the entire state votes on, and there wasn't a single libertarian in here. I mean, there were non-qualified parties. That's people who are in a party that's not an official party in California, like the Communist Party and whatnot. Not a single libertarian was in there. So then I went through, and actually, not that anyone needs to see it, but I actually went through and counted every single person that was running for office in the state. That's assembly, every statewide office. So assembly, state, okay, California Assembly, California Senate, the United States Senate, United States House, and the 11 statewide offices. So like governor, lieutenant governor, stuff like that. And there were all of 3 libertarians running in 165 offices. Now, the really problematic part about that is that doesn't even mean that the Libertarian Party helped, worked with, or convinced those 3 people to run as libertarians, because all it takes to run as a party member is to register with the state as the party and then pull paperwork and do your dance to run for office. So even if the Libertarian Party was actively searching for candidates, actively trying to find people to run, there are 3 out of 165 in the state. Now, for contrast, there were, let me see, 316 Democrats, 293 Republicans, 12 members of the Green Party, 4 no party preference. That's our version of independent, 6 Peace and Freedom, and 1 American Independent. So, and that what's actually kind of funny to me about that was that the Libertarian Party has the combined registration of the Peace and Green and the Peace and Freedom and the Green Party combined, and yet they put out, what was it, one sixth, wait, 3, yeah, 1/5 the number of candidates. I mean, they put out nobody to run. So the Libertarian Party is super worried about what's happening in Reno in a couple of days, the big Reno convention, the Libertarian Party National Convention. They're really worried about what's happening in 2024, and they're giving the largest state in the union with 40 million people nobody to vote for. I don't know. It seems like abandoning the state to me. Now, there are going to be people, obviously, that are running for city councils and stuff later in the year, because you don't pull paperwork for that till like June or July and other things. But I don't know. Seems to me that you have 165 offices and 3 people are running. Doesn't look like a party that's serious about trying to spread the message of liberty or win electoral office.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess one pushback on that, I suppose, would be maybe they just look at California as just lost hope. Like, what's the point of trying to run people that they know? I mean, look, it's the Libertarian Party. Obviously, they have like 0.1% chance of winning elections, and maybe that's, I don't know if that's too conservative, liberal, whatever. Let's just say they have it's a long shot. We'll just say of
Okay.
them winning anything.
Okay, so here's a good example. So I wasn't paying attention, and because I'm not a member of a party and I kind of don't care. But recently, this, like most states, California redrew our district maps. So my assembly person, who for years now, woman by the name of Sharon Quirk Silva, Democrat, almost impossible to beat. Republicans never beat her. I was like, oh, well, she's running again, so I'm just going to ignore that race because I don't care, because it's just it's a locked race. Excuse me, she's not in my district anymore. Now I have Philip Chen, a Republican, who was one city over. Now he's over my district, or where I live now. He's running unopposed. If the Libertarian Party was paying attention to how people were running, where they were running, what the likelihood was of the redrawn maps, that's a seat that would be guaranteed. Because California is different from a lot of states in that we have what's called a jungle primary. And that means that everybody runs in the primary. So assembly, Senate, stuff like that. And then the top two are who goes to the general election. So if you don't run in the primary, you cannot run in the general. That's just how it works. But if a libertarian had run in my district for state assembly, they'd be guaranteed a top two position. Well, that gives the Democrats someone else to vote for because there's no Democrats on the ballot. That gives the disenfranchised Republicans and no party preference voters somebody to vote for, and nobody's running in this district. Now, I've run for office before. I didn't want to do it again, so I wasn't really paying attention. I didn't really care. But as a party, they should have known this. They should have been watching these district maps. There are races that people are running unopposed. And if you just run people in those races, it elevates your party's position because it gives people somebody to vote for, somebody to look at they might not have otherwise paid attention to in races that are going to go to a single candidate. So now every Democrat for state assembly is either going to stay home or just not vote on that race. Every Republican is going to just vote for the de facto Republican, and everyone else is just not going to care, I guess, because there's no choice. Yeah, there are races where you're like, oh, that's a bright blue district. I'm not going to win in San Francisco or whatever, but sure. But I live in Orange County, and Orange County is considered to be fairly libertarian to begin with. Low taxes, socially liberal on a lot of things. There is opportunity. I don't know. I don't know that the party cares enough. And I'll actually track this back. You look back at the governor's race, not the recall race that just happened, but the governor's race of 2020 and 2020 had to have been 2020. But you look at the race. No, I guess what's the year? 2022, 2018. Whenever Nicholas Wildstar and what's the transhumanist name? Zora's another libertarian dude. He was running for governor. The Libertarian Party couldn't even choose who they were endorsing for governor. Like there were two libertarians who ran for governor, and the Libertarian Party it didn't endorse. Like if your party can't choose who your candidate, who you support, then how are the voters going to? How are the people going to? I don't think the California Libertarian Party knows how to tackle this state. It's also a huge state. You look at somewhere like New Hampshire with the Free State Project, and you have a state smaller than my county. It's going to be way easier to organize, way easier to talk to people, way easier to network. I can't get coffee with somebody who lives in San Francisco 8 hours away. So I think it's a geographic problem. There's a whole lot of reasons why. They have a lot of excuses, a lot of reasons. But at the end of the day, as a voter, I don't care. I don't care what their excuses are. I don't care what their reasons are. All I know is I look at my ballot and there is zero representation of who I can vote for from a party who screams at me not to vote for the duopoly. Well, congratulations. You gave me a choice to vote for the duopoly. What do I do now?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I mean, I guess if you want to look like you're doing something in a state that, and again, I'm trying to think of it from the Libertarian Party perspective. If they did see just the state as a whole as, well, we don't have a chance there in California, so maybe let's focus on, like, I don't know, Wyoming or Alabama or another state or something like that. Because
Sure, that would make sense, but they don't do that. They focus on the national race. Everyone's talking about who's going to run for president or the Libertarian Party ticket. 2020, Jo Jorgensen got 1.15% of the vote. She didn't get taken seriously by any major media establishment outlet because everyone was tribalist. Do you think in 2024, the entire country is going to open up and be like, you know what? I know that it's been really contentious, left versus right, but I'm willing to open my heart and mind to a third option. I mean, it's a laughable premise to think that we can't win in California, but we can win the national ticket. And if it's just a messaging thing, you could message in California too. You think California voters are going to take you more seriously because you're on the presidential line than the congressional line? I don't think that bared out in any ballot that's happened Everybody knows Ron Paul because he ran as a Republican in 2008. I don't think anybody could name a Libertarian Party candidate except for Ron Paul in 88.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a valid argument if they were actually doing those things, but I don't see them doing that. I think I see libertarians who are also members of the Libertarian Party doing things like the Free State Project. I see there's that Midwest project that's happening that they're trying to get people to run in certain races and whatnot.
Hmm.
For me, I don't care because I live in California.
Yeah.
I don't care what happens in Colorado or New Mexico or Wyoming or New Hampshire. I don't care. I care what happens in my state. And I look at it and it's like, oh, cool, they don't exist here. And I know the rebuttal from the Libertarian Party was like, well, the party is who shows up, and why don't you fix it? I'm like, why? Like, I don't have that much time on my hands to fix that problem. You know, if it felt like the party was doing a lot of work, and I just needed to help out to make it better, that'd be fine. But I've seen Libertarian Party stuff, and I've seen people who really do work hard and really do care here in California who have done a lot of work trying to build things. But when you show up, it looks like, oh, I have to then take the reins and build it after this person gets burned out. You know, I had somebody at the local level who was like, I'm not going to name the person, and it's not anybody you guys would think of because it's not a big name person in the party, but who was like, yeah, no, the party's full of what's a delicate way of saying this? Insane people, and it burns everybody out. You know, I know a guy who was chair of the local parties in California. He was actually around when the party was started. He's a local guy in my town that I'm friends with, and he's like, yeah, I still donate to them, but I don't go to anything because they don't do anything. That's terrible. You got legacy members of the party who think the party doesn't do anything. And so, yeah, there's a lot of excuses, a lot of reasons, but at the end of the day, the answer I always get from and again, so people know I'm not a registered member of the Libertarian Party, not national, not state, not local. I am not a delegate, none of those things. I just look at the party and go, how does this make my life more free? And if the party can't, and if the party's answer is show up and do a lot more work, yeah, that's not freedom. That's, work. That's volunteer work. That's cool. But yeah, that's not making my life more free. If they can't answer that question, what value is the party? To your point of, sorry to ramble, but to your point of, well, they're trying to do it elsewhere. I can't sell that to California. Join the Libertarian Party because Wisconsin might be more free this year. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think if they weren't so focused on, and look, I mean, if they're going to focus on national, that's their prerogative. That if that's what they want to do, then fine. But yeah, like to your point, you live in California, you worry and you care about what's going on in the state that you live in. That would be a fair perspective. Like why? Yeah, like why would you care what's going on in Nevada? I mean, maybe Nevada because it's like right there. Obviously, it's like your neighbor, so maybe you sort of kind of care because it's right there. But at the same time, it's like. So the Libertarian Party is telling me to do the work, but then when I see maybe, am I supposed to be the one doing the work? What about the person next to me? Like how many people are supposed to be doing the work?
Well, and that's the problem is that they tell you to do the work and you don't see a lot of people doing the work, at least not locally where I am. And again, that's an issue where you can point to people in other states, other areas, and that's what I get all the time. They're like, well, in Pennsylvania or in New Hampshire. And I'm like, cool. That has nothing to do with where I live. So you're asking me to show up and fix the party. And why would and here's the rebuttal on that. If I'm going to show up and fix a party, there is another party in California that's totally broken and not useful, and that's called the Republicans. I could just as easily show up and fix them as I could the Libertarian Party. I mean, anybody who's in the Libertarian Party knows of all the squabbling and all the fighting. I mean, the whole hashtag Reno reset for the end of this month in Reno, Nevada, is about the Mises Caucus trying to take over the Libertarian Party from the more pragmatic sort of, let's call them cocktail party libertarians. And that means that the party itself is fractured. It's no different than the Never Trump Republicans versus Team MAGA in the Republican Party. If you're going to have to show up and fight embedded vested interests and certain donors and all of that, if I'm going to have to bang my head against these walls, I could go to a party that has a guaranteed voter base. I mean, yeah, the Republican Party is only 24% of registered voters in California, but the Libertarians are 1%. I put an R next. If I want to run for office, I put an R next to my name. I'm guaranteed way more votes than putting an L next to my name, and nothing about my ideology changed. So,
especially like you said, if you put an R next to your name and you run in a district that you have a chance in winning, that could be something that you could do. But a lot of libertarians, when you tell them that, when you say, hey, maybe if you actually want to do something in the state to help it out, to gain more liberty within the state of California, maybe you should work with the Republic. No, it's got to be an L. You have to have an L next to your name. I know, because I disagree with them on one thing. No, I can't do it. Nope. No.
The easy test is, okay, can you name any member of Congress who's put forward libertarian ideas? I can point out Thomas Massey immediately. Every year he puts forward a bill to abolish the Department of Education. Every year he does that, right? I can point to, Ron Paul. He was very libertarian, wrote a book about ending the Fed from within the Republican Party. Like, that's fair. Like, you could point to libertarian ideology in the Republican Party. Can you point to any Libertarian Party member in Congress that's done anything ever? No, because they haven't existed. So
I can already hear the people being like, well, Justin Amash was libertarian. Yeah, but that's because he switched parties in the middle of
Justin Amash was independent longer than he was libertarian. He didn't join the Libertarian Party. He left the Republican Party, became an independent, realized he couldn't win his race again as an independent, carpet-bagged onto the Libertarian Party to try to take the presidential nominee, and then when that didn't pan out, stuck around. If Justin Amash was a libertarian, Justin Amash wasn't a Libertarian Party member of Congress, except as sort of a default position that was possibly going to benefit him towards the end. If he had left the Republican Party and immediately joined the Libertarians, there'd be an argument. But he didn't join the Libertarian Party until he decided to try to run for president. It was a carpetbagging thing at best. So yeah, but he was never really libertarian in Congress. He ran as a Republican. So anything that you credit him with in Congress goes to the Republican Party. That's how he ran. That's how he won. That's how he got in office. Sure, he left office as a Republican. He didn't even run for re-election. He joined the Libertarian Party after he already gave up his seat, essentially. So, yeah, I know the rebuttal on that, but it's wrong. Not a single into the 50 years the Libertarian Party has been a party, they haven't got a single federal office. And I did the math 2 years ago. If you do the math of how many House seats, because it's every 2 years, and how many Senate seats, not counting special elections, that the Libertarian Party has had a chance at by virtue that they could pull paper in any jurisdiction, right? There are over 10,000 chances that they could have had to win a single seat in Congress. They've never done it once. So it's like, oh, it has to be an L. It's never been one. So it has to be the first L? Yeah, miss me with that.
The one name that I can think of that I'm pretty sure he won an election as a representative was Marshall Burt, I think is his name, in Wyoming.
Do they have one?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's won. I don't know how. I know he's not like part of the 535 whatever, but he's like a big representative in Wyoming. And again, I'm not like on the top of my head.
Is he federal or state level?
I'm pretty sure he's just state level. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm talking federal. Because up until a couple of years ago, the largest race that a libertarian had ever won was actually Jeff Hewitt out of Riverside County Supervisor. So there are some wins for sure, but it becomes that issue of, if you're like, oh well, it has to be an L, then I'm sorry, you're just going to not win in certain races. You're just not going to succeed in certain races, and you have a huge hurdle to overcome. Everything that you can throw at the the Democrats or Republicans, people throw at the Libertarians also. I mean, how many times do you get people asking you about my roads?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And yeah, so I'm sure for you, where you do have no party affiliation, but I suppose you kind of gravitate more towards the Libertarian Party just because you kind of have those type of values more so than any others, I'm assuming, right?
Right. So I'm not a member. Okay, so I've only been registered with a party twice in my life. I registered with since I registered when I was 18 or whatever. So I was a registered member of the Democratic Party for about a year or so, because I literally registered to run against the guy that shared my first name. He was up for recall as a state senator. The Republicans were doing a terrible job in that. I did not trust them to get this guy recalled, and so I figured it would be really fun to take his signs, because his name was Josh Newman. My name is Joshua Ferguson. So I took his signs, and it said, vote no or whatever. And I made signs that looked identical to his, but they said, vote yes, vote Josh. Because in a recall, you vote on two things. Do you want to recall the person? Yes or no. And then who do you want to be in that office? Well, if you're being recalled, your name isn't listed as the candidates because you're not running for the office. You're trying to not be recalled. So the only Josh that was a Democrat to vote for was me. And the Democratic Party lost their minds. So I registered with them as a joke and sort of a trolling thing. And then I registered Libertarian because I'm friends with a lot of Libertarians. And I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot, whatever. And then I just went back to no party preference because I don't care. Ultimately, I'd say, yeah, ideologically, sure, I have a lot more in common with the Libertarian Party. I just don't I don't see the personal utility for me in California. I don't try to knock it for people. Like if you think it's great for your state, great for your municipality, whatever, awesome. You think you can save the Libertarian Party with the Mises Caucus, awesome. I don't try to tell people that you're doing it wrong because I think that's sort of a dumb mentality to have. Different people like different things. They gravitate towards different things. It's sort of what we were talking about earlier. It's like if TikTok works for you, use it. If Twitter works for you, use it. Whatever medium works for you to promote your liberty, your message, whatever, do you. And I feel that way about the LP. I just don't see a lot of use with it with people like Sarwalk or JBH or whoever who were running the party for the longest time. And then I see California basically being abandoned by the LP, and I just go, meh. It doesn't make my life freer. It doesn't increase liberty in my sphere. So whatever. Republican Party is useless. I would never vote for a Democrat. I've made that mistake once in my life. I'll never do it again. Republican Party is corrupt and ridiculously corrupt in my area, so I can't affiliate with them. And the Libertarian Party is non-existent. So it's just absolutely, I think they're the closest to me. But my local Libertarian Party story is I went to one of their meetings at a Denny's and they didn't show up.
Well, that's just unfortunate. So I guess switching gears to the next thing that I wanted to kind of touch upon is another TikTok thing that you had did that I thought was pretty interesting was when you had talked about the Disinformation Governance Board being paused as opposed to some people saying, oh, it's over. Like we don't have to worry about it anymore. But it's basically like pending review, I suppose. Like we're going to find out who the next person is going to be to take over whoever that lady was or something like that. So can you kind of go over that a little bit?
Yeah. So obviously everyone was mad about the Ministry of Truth because, the government's got a government and bunch of pushback, bunch of flack. And then Nina Jankowicz had all these talking points. Like she had one where she said that people should be like the good verified users, not all verified users, but the good verified users on Twitter should be able to edit other people's tweets to add context. And so a bunch of that and a bunch of other nonsense with her came out. And so they like this last Monday, I think it was a Monday, whatever the date was, last week or so, they said they were going to stop it. Department of Homeland Security is like, we're going to shut down the Disinformation Governance Board. And then on Tuesday, they decided, no, we're going to keep it. We're just going to put it on pause. And they actually tried to retain Nina Jankowicz. She was going to tender her resignation. They tried to keep her on. And then on Wednesday, she actually resigned. But yeah, the Disinformation Governance Board is on hold while they try to recharacterize and better explain its purpose and what it does. So it's not going anywhere. They're just going to wait till the midterms are over or whatever, and then bring it back like they do every other government agency. I think an example I like to use on something like this is that the United States had a federal tea tasting board from the 1800s until the Clinton administration. Like nothing goes away in government. Except in rare instances where they have to do something. So this isn't going anywhere. And also think about this. People were sort of pejoratively calling it the Ministry of Truth, the throwaway to 1984. If you've read 1984, the government wins in that book. Like it's a dystopian novel. Like the government Big Brother wins. At least that's how I remember reading it. Like the whole resistance was a fraud, kind of like how the FBI sets people up now. It's that thing. Like they're not going to let this tool go away. What was it you had mentioned before? It's like before the show, it's like what Twitter has the thing where the crisis thing where we need to worry about disinformation. Nobody's given that up. You have to control the message or the truth might escape. So yeah, a lot of people, especially on the right, were really doing victory laps on that. I even saw some libertarians doing it where they were like, oh, the disinformation board's gone. I mean, no, it's not. Show me on the doll where it's gone, because every news story was like, oh, it's on pause, it's on hold.
Yeah, didn't it break in the Washington Post, the most trustworthy publication, apparently.
So the Washington Post reported on it, and then so did Business Insider, Insider.com had reported on it as well. And both of them were both said that it was on pause. It was on hold. You're like, oh, so it's not going anywhere. Awesome. Awesome. Way to, and that, I think that's really detrimental to people, because now people are taking this victory lap, and your average sort of, let's not say no information or low information, but your sort of passive political person sees that and goes, oh, cool, we won that one. That's a win for my team, when it wasn't. Like, you have to stay vigilant on this stuff, or you just sort of forget what happens. And, it's sort of dangerous to take quick W's when there isn't one. Like, it's just halftime. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. And so since you had mentioned it, talking about Twitter's new crisis misinformation policy. So I just wanted to say too about kind of like the victory lap thing or whatever, is how a lot of people, and rightly so probably, is Elon Musk buying Twitter and becoming basically the primary owner of the social media website. And he's been tweeting some things where like, I like what he tweeted there. That's nice. But again, how do we know 100% that what Elon Musk is saying he's actually going to do? Because I'm sure you can look up instances in the past where he's been in some shady shit. I mean, obviously he's a freaking one of, if not the most rich person in the world. I mean, he has the power to pretty much do whatever the hell he wants to do because he has so much money at his fingertips. So him basically buying Twitter and kind of saying the things that, a lot of people on the right, and I'm definitely one of them where like, and maybe I'm being naive, but I really hope what he's saying, I'm like, I swear you better say, because a lot of people who don't like the right, like the left and liberals and the progressives, are like, oh my God, Elon Musk, I'm leaving Twitter. And then like Sean King was a big example. I'm leaving Twitter. And he left Twitter for like 3 hours and he came back. Like, yeah, okay, you're back. So then what? Now what are you going to do? It's just, I guess I'm going to keep using Twitter because I lost my however many million.
No, to be fair, do we know that he's not logging in from twitter.ca?
Who knows? Like who the hell knows what's going on?
Because they all threatened to go to Canada when Trump won. So I'm assuming when
Right.
they threatened to leave Twitter, they just meant .com, and they're all logging in from .ca now. I think the issue with Elon is, I can actually circle this back to the LP if I want to be really obtuse about it. It's a cult of personality. Is that everyone's like, oh, he's tweeting these things that are awesome, and so I definitely have to follow him and believe what he has to say. But I see this in every party. I see this in social media, politics, all of that, where it's like, yeah, like all the people who were pro MAGA, and yet Trump was more anti-Second Amendment than Barack Obama was. Trump passed more anti two-way, he didn't pass legislation per se, but he pushed the executive order that led to the bump stock ban. He was talking about was willing to talk about getting rid of suppressors. He said in favor of red flag laws, take the guns, have due process later. Like, all the people are like, oh, yay, he's on my team. And then he does all these things that are absolutely not your team's ideology. I think that's the risk we have with Elon as well. Like, yeah, he's tweeted some cool stuff. Yeah, I too want to see Twitter headquarters become a homeless shelter. That'd be great. But I also remember he was promising us candy, and then he didn't do that. He was going to have a candy company. I think he had talked about that with the Babylon Bee, where they couldn't figure out something that was going to be amazing, so it just didn't happen. And it was mostly a joke. But I don't know if it's true or not, but there was a critique where he said he was going to fix anybody's problem water in Flint, Michigan, and then didn't. Or was going to get all these ventilators during the outbreak of the unknown virus of unspecified origins, and instead delivered different machines. So his mouth writes a lot of checks that his bank account may not be able to cash. And will he have as much say as he wants? I mean, will the government just step in and create something like the Disinformation Governance Board, or do things that require him to bend over for them? I mean, you look at things like everyone's like, oh, when he buys it, it'll be free unless the state says otherwise. I mean, they're already talking. They immediately were talking about, rewriting the section of the DCMA in order to go after him. Then you got to think about the financial institutions. Look at what happened when during the Obama administration with Operation Choke Point, where the administration threatened banks by threatening to revoke their FDIC insurance if they didn't cut off accounts with certain people. I mean, they could do the same thing with Twitter with various legal issues that they have. there's a whole bunch of things that are happening behind the scenes. And sure, he wants it to be a free speech platform, but he's still going to censor stuff. You have to, by law. Threats of harm have to be censored. Certain things have to be censored. I mean, you know, as much as the left likes to parade people that believe in like MAP and whatnot, that stuff has to be censored by law. So it's never going to be a truly free speech platform. And you can have that argument if you want about the merits of that. But the reality is that the law can change. Most of the left wants hate crime legislation to ban no naughty words and hate speech. If the law changes, and it will take years for something to be adjudicated with the Supreme Court, that effectively nukes his ability to make it free speech. So even if you want to take him on faith, we still can't say it's going to happen. And I don't take anything on faith. Cool, Elon does all these cool things. Cool, he's going to have Starlink or whatever. Awesome, SpaceX, cool. But I need to see what he actually does first. I'm not even convinced that he's actually buying Twitter. I think it was all just a ploy to tank them, to be honest. Knowing that the bots are as prolific as they are, they have to release how many bots they have and prove it for his sale to go through, which could tank their company. So I'm not even convinced he's buying it.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. This could all be financially motivated, where they can tank it and kind of just make a ton of money. Where like I don't know, something about like buying the stock and then it goes or something. I don't know how the whole thing goes, but like it dips and he buys the stock and it goes back up. Okay, I'm selling it, but I made a ton of money. Woo!
Or not even that. I mean, there's rumors of him releasing his own phone. He's got his own internet provider. All he has to do is put a platform on his phone, buy Mark Cuban's Cyberdust or something, put it on his own phone, promise free speech on that, and then Twitter's a relic. So, if he was smart, he would find a way to backdoor buy True Social and force Trump back on his platform.
He'd definitely probably have an easier time doing that for sure.
Right.
But yeah, so about this crisis misinformation policy that Twitter kind of came up with, whatever, recently. So I'll share here for those who are watching, kind of what they're talking about. I'm going to put it on the screen. So they made this whole blog post here about it, about what it's all about. One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting was, so here in one of these paragraphs is developing the policy. And it says teams at Twitter have worked to develop a crisis misinformation framework since last year, drawing on key input from global experts and human rights organizations. For the purpose of this policy, we define crises as situations in which there is a widespread threat to life, physical safety, health, or basic subsistence. This definition is consistent with the United Nations definition of a humanitarian crisis and other humanitarian assessments. Down the line, as we expand our approach, we will enforce around other emergent global crises informed by the United Nations Interagency Standing Committee, Emergency Response Framework, and other global humanitarian frameworks. So they've been basically working on this since last year. And I thought it was funny because talking about the UN, been working with the UN and all this stuff. And I mean, the whole thing was basically because there's been a lot of information coming out, misinformation or whatever you want to call it, with people's opinions on the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict that's going on. And so they also point out here and later in here in the blog post, it says some examples of tweets that we may add a warning notice to include false coverage or event reporting or information that mischaracterizes conditions on the ground as the conflict evolves. What's going on right now? There's conflict in Russia, Ukraine, and other parts of the world. False allegations regarding use of force, incursions on territorial sovereignty or around the use of weapons, demonstrably false or misleading allegations of war crimes or mass atrocities against specific populations, false information regarding international community response, sanctions, defensive actions, or humanitarian operations, strong commentary, efforts to debunk or fact check, and personal anecdotes or first person accounts do not fall within the scope of the policy. So it kind of makes you be like, okay, so they've been working on this since last year. And then they kind of dropped this while the Russia-Ukraine conflict's going on. A lot of people are saying their thing and writing articles and all that. So if I write an article that says, and we kind of mentioned this too, while before we recorded, was the whole like the ghost of Kiev thing that happened, and now how that's like all folklore and everything like that, and that was basically proven to be a piece of shit story. But then they're still using that as, well, it's a rallying cry. They're going to have these people rally because this ghost of Kiev shot down 6-7 Russian warfighter jets, but that's not that wouldn't be considered false, like fake news, whatever.
I don't remember if it was when I was reading up on that. I don't remember if it was BBC or Reuters, but one of them, I think it was BBC, called it folklore. It's a fable to rally the troops. Yeah, that's called war propaganda, is what that is. That's literally disinformation. The Snake Island soldiers that allegedly got killed didn't get killed. The Ghost of Kiev wasn't true. The Sunflower in the Pockets Girl, Seeds in the Pocket Girl wasn't true. I mean, all those stories were all just war propaganda, and none of that gets called out as disinformation. Here's an interesting take, though. I'll give you an example. So when you were reading that, I looked up the Global Crisis Response Group from the United Nations, and the first thing they say is the war in Ukraine, it's in all its dimensions, is producing alarming cascading effects to the world economy already battered by COVID-19 and climate change. Don't ever forget, the UN thinks that climate change is a global catastrophe. It's a crisis. Ergo, anything on that will be considered disinformation. Like if you point out the hockey stick graph back in the day and all the other hilarious lies that we've been told over the years, global cooling, global warming, whoops, climate change, all of that constantly changes, all of that will be considered disinformation that Twitter will go after, because if they're working with the UN, that's one of the biggest crises that mankind faces right now.
Yeah, apparently, what is it, like Earth will be uninhabitable in like 30 years or something like that.
Oh,
But they've been saying that, yeah.
Yeah, all that. The population bomb was a lie, all that stuff. And also you have to remember that a lot of people in the UN call the ownership of firearms a crisis. So are you going to be able to talk about your Second Amendment rights on Twitter, or will that be considered disinformation? It gets really, really weedy really quick when you start looking at how they use these terms and sort of how amorphous they become. Because first of all, what do they consider a crisis? Because it seems to be everything. If the climate is a crisis, then just about everything is that affects that. That's energy production, that's food production, that's agriculture, that's housing, and that's everything. Look at the Green New Deal and what they were trying to touch. So everything now. And then you look at all this stuff like, okay, well, what counts as disinformation? Well, whatever they don't like. It's never objective. Or like you said, they would point out things like the Ghost of Kiev. They would point out all of these other things, which they don't do unless they're forced to. It's not a free speech issue. It's not a exposing bad ideas with better ideas. It's going to be a reason to censor people's views and opinions because they have wrongthink.
So what if I say something about the Joe Biden administration sending troops to Somalia, and I say something about that I guess they're not going to say anything because that's not important enough. The war in Ukraine, that's very important. What's going on in Somalia? No.
Maybe or maybe not. But you look at how nefarious it comes with, especially with the warfare state and everything else. You have, the government, the top brass of the military, or the advisors rather, were lying to the president when Trump was president about how many troops we had in certain countries because they were worried he would want to withdraw them. Like the president wasn't making policy on our war powers positions because he wasn't given full information. He was being manipulated. If they're willing to do that to the president, you think they aren't willing to do it to you? Maybe we can't talk about. Scott Horton and Dave Smith love to beat the drum on Yemen. How long until they can't talk about that anymore? That's a crisis.
Good point.
It becomes that thing. Not that they would be in favor of this, disinformation nonsense anyways, but right. It affects all of these different things that people don't really think about or realize. And I don't trust any company, any group of people, any government agency, any connected cocktail party. I really wanted to use a couple expletives right there, but I'm going to refrain from it. People from controlling how you can say things, what you can say, and what have you.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Yemen and all that. Like that's been going on since 2014 or something like that. And that's another thing where if they were so worried about, and I don't even, this doesn't even have to be said, but it's not like, okay, so the war in Ukraine is happening. It's a terrible situation. I think pretty much anyone can kind of agree on that. But at the same time, it's like there are all these other conflicts that the the intellectual press, they don't really look at that as something like, man, we got to talk about what's going on over there in Yemen right now.
It's worse than that, because you look at how it's connected. It's like you look at, or how the things play out. You look at Yemen, and that was a Hillary Clinton thing where she really pushed for that. We launched over 100 Tomahawk missiles into that country, destabilized it, caused all these problems, and the Saudis have been just rampaging against that country for 8 years now. And we just sort of go, oh, well, they're our ally. Who cares? It was factional fighting, sectarian fighting between groups for years and years and years. We got involved, destabilized the government, and Saudi just kicked the crap out of them for the last 8 years. You're like, oh, that's just regional conflict. But then you look over at Ukraine, where, oh wait, we did the same thing only without missiles. We helped orchestrate a coup that overthrew their government, and there was factional infighting between Russian Ukrainians and non-Russian Ukrainians, and all this fighting and factionalism and all these things. And then Russia pulled a Saudi Arabia and went into Ukraine, and we're like, oh no, now it's World War III, and we have to super care. Like, wait, hold on. We care about human rights there, but not there. We care about a destabilized nation there, but not. I mean, if Russia was our trading partner, we'd be turning a blind eye to Ukraine. The moral outrage is fake at best. It's like Facebook. Not long ago, they said that they were going to allow people to support the Azov battalion. Like, what? Like, my first foray into Libertarian Party politics, I was invited to somebody's house party out in LA. Somebody I would never associate with ever again, because it was a terrible human being, and I was warned off to never talk to them again. But this dude, claiming to be a libertarian, was all on the punch a Nazi thing. Like, that was his big thing. Like, work that down. It's all about that. And I was like, that's assault, bro. Like, that's a problem. And for years we were hearing that, like, you should be able to do this, or to pejoratively, you could punch a David Duke type person, that type of thing. Like, it's okay because they're evil. And you're like, oh, you mean like the Azov battalion? Well, no, it's different this time. No, it's not the same. They're just evil over there. And so all the moral outrage is fake. All of the the partisanship, all of that's just nonsense. And it gets really frustrating because you'll have, I mean, Twitter is putting up this thing over Ukraine when they didn't care about all the misinformation or whatever coming out about Yemen or whatever. The only way I'll be honest, the only way you even know there's a war in Yemen is if you're a libertarian, because libertarians won't stop talking about it. Justifiably, but that's why.
Yeah, that they definitely don't stop talking about it. But it is an important issue for sure. But I think the way that you can maybe solve this issue, if you want to stop the government's involvement, is just have private companies go over there and do it.
Well, they were doing some of that back before the whole Rwanda thing happened, and there were private companies going through and stopping what was happening in, what was it, Sierra Leone and Angola, I think. And then the Clinton administration and UN put a stop to that, because we can't have private contractors, doing these war type things. And then, a million or so people got yeeted in Rwanda, while we and the world sat by and watched. So I mean, there are solutions to this stuff. A lot of it, we can't deal with it. We can't be the world police, et cetera, et cetera. But the scary part is when they weaponize what's happening for their own aims. Yeah, like you said, Twitter's saying they were talking about this a year ago. What was happening in Ukraine wasn't happening a year ago. So why is that their big focus on it? What were they worried about then? I would love to see the internal memos of how this started, because I guarantee you it was all about the unknown virus of unspecified origins. So,
yeah, I was kind of half joking about the private company thing, because libertarians were like, the government is doing all this stuff overseas, but if private companies were doing it, oh well, that's
it's a private company. I was thinking about that with the whole, not to get into the whole road thing, but I was thinking about that, where it's like, everyone's talking about, I have a right to privacy. I'm like, dude, the hospital's a private company. They can sell your data. Right? It's a private company. What?
Well, they're a private company that's contracted with the government, and that's all intertwined. And
No. I'm talking about how, like, like whenever you talk about how it's Twitter or whoever's going to censor everybody, and the hardcore libertarians or ANCAPs are like, it's a private company, they can do what they want.
Right.
Meanwhile, the only reason Twitter can exist is because the government protects their intellectual property that stops anybody from directly competing with them in the same way. Like, if somebody has aped the Twitter algorithm, they would be thrown into court and they'd be just bankrupted because the government protects it. The government's the only reason Twitter and Facebook and all these companies can exist, by virtue of protecting their intellectual property. Same way the government contracts with hospitals and shovels money at them and everything else. So the idea that it's like, oh, Twitter can censor you because it's a private company. Yeah, and the hospital can give your private medical data to the sheriff's department because it's a private company, right? Those arguments fall apart really quickly.
Yep. Yeah. And yet people still do them because I guess it makes them feel good. I don't know. Hey, as long as the government's not doing it, then I'm okay.
I'm okay with it. So I have a question for you. The tables have turned. The turns have tabled. So the first time I heard of you was when you asked a question during the Soho forum between then Libertarian Party chair Nicholas Sarwark and Dave Smith. And that's one of the things that sort of, I think, propelled Dave Smith forward in the libertarian world, because I know a lot of people didn't know who he was before then, and really just elevated his position, I think. What are your thoughts? Because I have my own, but what are your thoughts on the prospect of him running for president in 2 years?
Wow, you put me on the spot there.
You
Um,
don't have to answer. I'm just being mean.
No, I'm going to answer because I don't want to beat around the bush. And I'm sure if you had asked Dave this, well, I mean, if you've asked him anything, I'm sure you wouldn't beat around the bush. So I'm not going to do the same thing. And we're good acquaintances. I would think. He's always had nice things to say, and I know that when we were going through our infertility struggles, he was very supportive of us. So I really appreciate that. But I will say, get all the pleasantries out of the way. I'll just say that. In terms of him running for president, because maybe it's the worst kept secret, but I'm just going to say it anyway. I do think that that's like my prediction, is that that's definitely going to be something that's going to be announced or something, is that he's definitely running to be the nominee for the Libertarian Party in 2024. And I did say this because we were talking about it a little bit as well before we recorded, but I will say it really depends in terms of, because I did say this too with other people, and at the time, and I know it's recent history because it was like a couple weeks ago, last week or whatever, when I was talking to them, and I was saying, I don't know if I would vote for him. I don't think I would. Now I'm kind of thinking, well, it really depends on who ends up being the nominees because like for Democrat, I'm not voting for Democrat. I don't care. Unless it's like a really good Democrat somehow, but I don't see that happening. If it was a Mike Pence or a Mitt Romney type of person, then I'm not saying I would or I will, but I'm saying I'm more inclined to vote for Dave Smith. But if it was someone like Thomas Massey or a Rand Paul, and I know Rand Paul, but yeah, if it was those two, or even a Ron DeSantis, if he decided to run and he got the nomination, or if it was Donald Trump who decided he's going to run again and he got the nomination, I'd probably be more inclined to vote for those guys, because I'd rather have them there than the other two guys that I had mentioned when I said I would vote for them. So, yeah, you can say what you're going to say.
No. I was just thinking it's like, that's sort of the take. It's like, I've never met Dave Smith. I've never talked to him. I think I've had one Twitter exchange with him ever. He seems like a decent guy. Seems like a good guy. Seems like a reasonable person. My question for the Libertarian Party is, for the longest time, has been, then what? Because he's not going to win. I mean, that's just reality. Even if we can even hypothesize that even if he did win, cool, you're president and you have a hostile Congress against you because not a single Congress member is a libertarian. So now what? What are you going to do? Just veto everything? I mean, that's awesome, but they're just going to override you with bipartisan support. So the question is, when he loses, then what? because Joe Jorgensen got 1.15% of the vote. I mean, she got more voters because everybody voted, even those who probably weren't alive, but everybody voted in this country last, in 2020. So she got more numbers of votes, but like 1.15% of the actual vote total. I don't see him pulling a Ross Perot. I don't see him pulling 18 to 20%, or let alone enough to win. So what does the party do after that? I mean, to circle it back to the beginning of the show, is that the Libertarian Party's abandoned my state. Everyone I know is talking about the national, what's happening in Reno at the end of May, and then the worst kept secret in the LP of him or Spike Cohen running in one of the two capacities. So when they don't win in 2024, then what does the party do? Like, what's their goal? Because for me, I don't see it as a big rallying cry. And I do see it a little bit of a cult of personality, in that Smith's a good speaker. He seems like an affable human being. He seems like a nice guy. He seems to care about people genuinely. But people seem to look past how the system actually works. Like, even if he was pulling 10% in the polls, they would just move the threshold to 15 to get in the debates. And if he got 15, they'd move it to 20. I mean, they changed it because Ross Perot did so well. I don't know. I did a video on TikTok about this. The Republican Party has said that they're leaving the commission on presidential debates because of how biased it is, which means they're just going to either for leverage or going to set up their own thing or whatever. But is the Libertarian Party trying to get in on that? Are they trying to fight their way into being relevant? And if so, how? And what is the plan after that? Because, I mean, if it's just a messaging thing, all right, cool. Dave Smith's already been on Rogan. What audience is he going to reach that he can't already reach now? And why would they take him seriously? I don't know that there's a value add. Depending on what state you live in, it could matter. If you're in a purple state, it'll matter. If you're in a red state, it probably won't. I'm in a way blue state. Doesn't matter at all here. So I probably wouldn't. I mean, I guess it wouldn't matter either way. I guess I could, and it wouldn't really matter. But, I look at it, and I think the Dave Smith question is actually what sort of pushed me off of the Mises caucus for the most part, because that's what it always comes down to. The Libertarian Party always comes down to who's running for president next time. And I just kind of don't care. If that makes sense. And
yeah, I would just say that and I know a lot of other libertarians have said this too, and a lot of people in the party, and I'm sure a lot of people in the Mises caucus have said this as well, is that if they were to just kind of focus a lot of their attention on just like local elections, winning, and I'm sure they have. But again, I'm kind of someone that's just on the outside looking. I'm not in the party. I'm not there at all the meetings. I have hardly any idea of how all the things go in the party or whatever. So I'm kind of just looking at it with like binoculars, you know what I mean?
Right.
So if they were to focus on local elections and like, okay, like you were saying before, if they did focus and they were kind of paying attention on, there's only one, this guy's running unopposed. Let's run someone there and try and get do something there. We'll have some kind of a chance if it's just a Democrat versus a Libertarian or whoever.
I'll give you an example of sort of what's right and what's wrong, and why I kind of am so jaded about it. I would say the two people in the Libertarian Party who have impressed me, well, one way more than the other, just because I've dealt with her way more. Angela McArdle actively tried to get me in the Libertarian Party. So when I first started doing the Hourly Struggle as an actual podcast before I moved over to a different platform, I had done a video or a couple on California's high-speed rail boondoggle. And she sent me a message on Facebook saying, "Hey, I'm giving a talk at the LA County, Libertarian Party. Do you know anybody who knows about high-speed rail?" And she was just sort of like trying to ask me without asking me, I guess. And I was like, "Well, I'm not an expert, but I've read a lot about it. Like, I know a lot about it." And so she's like, "Yeah, cool. Are you willing to come in and give a talk?" And I did. And then when my city sued me, which is a whole other story for another day, I think actually we talked about this in another episode a couple years ago when it first happened. But when my city sued me, she had me come out again and talk to them again. Now, I'm not a member of the Libertarian Party. I'm just sort of Liberty adjacent. And she reached out multiple times and was actively trying to get me to join the party. The only other person that ever came close to that was a guy named David, who was the chair of the Orange County Libertarian Party. When I ran into him, he would try to convince me to join as well. Angela went above and beyond. Like, she sort of found me on Facebook and Twitter and what have you in order to try to get me to join. I've never seen the Libertarian Party do that besides that. like looking for people, like go onto Twitter or TikTok or whatever and just type in the hashtag libertarian and look for people that aren't affiliated with the party who are talking about these things and try to bring them in. If the party was more focused on that, it'd be a different thing. But it always seems like, hey, we need a message on the national level so we can get our ideas out into the marketplace of ideas that have resoundingly rejected libertarian ideology for the longest time. So it's like, we need to get out there and do this. I'm like, well, are you doing it anywhere else? Are you doing it locally? And I don't know. I don't see it. I think if they were doing that, it'd be a different story. I'd love to see the party or just the groups do that. I think this sort of fact, you look at the party, like I see it, a lot of sort of the insidey stuff, because I have a lot of friends that are on the inside or acquaintances that deal with it all. And it's always factionalism. Like the big thing happening in Reno is whether the Mises caucus will take over the party, who the real libertarians are, the whole no true Scotsman fallacy thing. Every convention, they try to remove the pro-choice plank out of the platform because that keeps people on the right from ever joining. So they're basically going to probably just try to not take a position on it, which in itself is a position. So it becomes all these things where there's no focus, there's no goal. And I don't know how that changes unless you drill down to more local stuff. I don't know that the national stuff is winning out on anything. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the party has a whole bunch of registered members and voters and all these things, and they're way stronger than I think. But I don't know, man. I feel like a lot of it is just big fish, small pond thing. You see a lot of people who join and leave, and then you have like, the libertarians arguing with the post-libertarians and all of this stuff. And you can see that anywhere. Like I said earlier, that's MAGA versus never Trump. I mean,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And the same with the Democrats and like the socialist faction, I suppose you can say, against like the Nancy Pelosi's of the party or whatever.
Sure.
Sort
I
of
mean,
the same thing.
I would say the difference there is that the Democrats are always like, the Overton window is always shifting towards socialism. And the progressives on the left want like full-throated,
Yeah.
socialism, and the Nancy Pelosi types are just inching their way towards it because they want to profit on it as much as possible. They're the red nobility. Right. And the Republicans have the Nancy Pelosi Republicans, and then sort of the MAGA people or whatever. And then you have the Liberty people like Rand Paul that are separate. I think the Liberty world needs to be relevant more and stop infighting so much so they can coalesce around messages. But
yeah,
I don't hold out much hope.
Yeah. And I guess the last thing that I'll say about like the Libertarian Party and Arena Reset and Dave Smith, again, I mean, it hasn't been confirmed or whatever, but I think that's pretty much a done deal. I would think. I mean, again, maybe we're wrong. Maybe that we've all been completely blindsided. Oh, wait, he's not. Okay, well, I guess that's cool.
I think he's running. I do. I think if he doesn't, he'll endorse somebody like Spike Cohen. I think he's running. He's been teasing it for a year or more now. The Mises Caucus has been teasing it for a year or more now. Whether or not he wins is a whole different story. I mean, if you had asked anybody in 2020 who the nominee was going to be, nobody was going to pick Joe Jorgensen. It was just, that's just what happened during the convention. So
yeah, I think Joe Jorgensen was kind of the well, we don't like Jacob Hornberger and we don't like whoever else was running at the time. I think Joe Jorgensen's a good safe bet. Let's go for her. And then of course, being a safe bet, like you said, she got like what 1.5 million. The thing with her that I thought was hilarious was when she went on Rubin Report and asked Dave Rubin like point blank, "Hey, you gonna vote for me? You're gonna vote?" And Dave just went on this whole thing about basically the whole gist of his answer was no.
I clipped that and put it on Twitter and tagged Rubin, and Rubin retweeted that with just laughing emojis because it was just that thing of like, when he doesn't love you back sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And it was just, it was so painful to watch. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know that we could predict it. It's 2 years out, what have you. I mean, Spike Cohen wasn't anybody's top pick. I mean, he was some people's top pick, don't get me wrong, but he became the de facto pick because of inter-party nonsense. Right. I do want to, because I like to pick on the Libertarian Party out of love, mostly, I do want to point out that it is their 50th anniversary this year with their convention, and their slogan is Liberty Unmasked. I'd like to point out that that's hilarious because 2 years ago, they almost didn't have an in-person convention because so many people in the party were afraid to go anywhere, and half their convention and their nominating was all online. So when it really, really mattered, they were absolutely masked, except for the Mises people, because they're the ones that pushed for the in-person convention that I was at in Orlando. But now, 2 years later, they're finally unmasked after the CDC said it was okay. So
Yeah, yeah, that was pretty funny when I saw that. I was like, wow, okay. And yeah, like you said, a lot of the people in the Mises caucus were basically, no, we're not going to follow this. And, Dave Smith was really good on that. Tom Woods was really good on that. And a bunch of other people that were hounding on that. They were really good. Um,
I walked around Orlando that entire convention in 2020 with either a coffee or an energy drink in my hand because you didn't have to wear a mask if you were drinking. I have a video that I did on the floor where you can actually hear me crunch my can a little bit by accident, and you can tell that it's empty because it was just my prop the whole time. But yeah, there were a lot of people that were really good on it. That's what, again, the Mises Caucus was. That's why they had the in-person convention in Orlando. But a lot of people were not, and so I do think that's funny. I just think it's a funny slogan for 2022 when that's not really the big issue anymore. So
yeah, that's definitely a good point. But yeah, so the last thing I'm going to say about the whole Dave Smith thing that I was going to say is that if he does decide to run, I think, like, if he went on Rubin Report, I'm sure he's smart enough not to say, "Hey, you gonna vote for me, Dave?" Like, he's not gonna say, maybe off camera, yeah, but not while they're recording. You know what I mean? They're not gonna do that. And yeah, he'll probably go on Joe Rogan again, which is great. Huge, obviously a huge platform to be on. He was just on another interview. I think it was like Patrick Bet David, I believe it's the guy's name. He was just on there with other people, Larry Sharp, Spike Cohen, and that went well. So yeah, I think in terms of the messaging, in terms of getting that message out, I think Dave is as good as any of them to
oh,
kind of
oh,
let people
oh,
know.
oh, to be fair, I don't think there's anybody currently within the Libertarian Party that can speak better to the message and can relate more to people. I mean, I think that's why Hornberger didn't win in 2020 for the Libertarian Party, because he didn't come off as relatable. He came off as, the angry professor of the dark arts. And so it just didn't work. But I think Dave probably is one of the best voices in the movement. He probably is one of the most affable, most believable people. He comes off as, what, the most consistent motherfucker, and that's great. Whether it matters or not, I don't know. We'll see. Only time will tell. I agree with you. It depends on where you live. It depends on who's running. I mean, anybody who says, "Hey, I don't." Okay, let me just say, I don't think he'll go on Dave Rubin and ask if Rubin would vote for him on air. I don't think he'd make a blunder like that. I also don't think he'd have a "what's Aleppo" moment, right? I think he will be a great voice if he runs, but whether or not that's enough to convince people to vote is a whole different issue. I'd love to see their strategy on what they plan to do, but I'm not party to any of that, so it won't happen.
Yeah.
So.
But I definitely think, to kind of wrap this whole thing up, is that, like you said, he runs, he doesn't win. Then what? What's the plan there? What's the strategy there? And I think, and I've seen people ask that, and a lot of, at least from what I've seen people kind of just, they're like, we're not looking that far ahead. And I guarantee you, there's the Republican National Committee or Democrat. I'm sure they're thinking, you know what, 2024, we're already thinking down the line of who we want, because you can already hear ramblings of, I don't know if I want Kamala to be the Democrat. We got to find someone else. Like
Sure.
Kamala, ugh.
Sure, you never know who's going to win. Nobody would have predicted Barack Obama a couple of years before he became president. I mean, it was that thing where you never know who's going to win or how it's going to shake out, for sure. Some people just bomb on stage. Some people do really well. You never know. But if the party is not thinking ahead, you're like, okay, so if you ask most libertarians in the party, you ask them what's going to happen, and they're like, oh, well, we're trying to get 5%, for matching or whatever. You're like, okay, and if that doesn't happen, let's say 2020 happens, irrespective of how well Dave does, you're going to have so many mail-in ballots, so many drop boxes, so many things. Everyone's trying to facilitate every registered voter possibly voting. When that happens and you're just mathematically drowned out and you don't get 5%, then what? What's the plan then? And if the answer is something underpants liberty, that's not going to be a great selling point. And because, again, I've had this conversation with people back in 2020 when I was asking them who they were going to vote for and what party they were looking at. Nobody really had an answer of why should I vote for Joe Jordan, except for it's not the duopoly, Okay, cool. It's a triopoly. Yay.
Yeah, Justin Amash said that, I think, when he was on MSNBC, I believe, in one interview where he said, yeah, I want, like, something along the lines of, I want to be the third option for people. Okay, well, what does that do for me? Third option. Okay, well, these other two options are pretty much going to be the only ones that will have a chance of winning. So what's the like? Yeah.
I touched on this before we started recording, but it's a really bad argument to make, and unfortunately, libertarians are really good at making bad arguments, intellectually sound, but sometimes just bad arguments. Because if your argument is that we're not part of the duopoly, the president's a little bit different, but any other office, you're like, yeah, but you still have to work with the duopoly. Like if you win a seat in the state house, you have to work with a majority party or to a coalition to make a majority coalition in order to get committee assignments, in order to have any sway, in order to do anything, in order to pick the house or the House Speaker, the Senate Speaker. I mean, if a Republican was, or sorry, if a Libertarian was to win a Senate seat, are they voting for Mitch McConnell or are they voting for the Democrat? If they win a House seat, are they voting for Nancy Pelosi or Kevin McCarthy? So it's that issue, like, who are you going to caucus with? You can't just tell me, I'm going to be don't vote for the duopoly, because unless they take a majority, you still have to work with the duopoly. You're still going to caucus with them. So it's not really an answer. It's just this talking point that's not really, thought about in the long term of what does that really mean? Oh, it means you're going to build a coalition government after you're elected without telling me who you're going to coalition with. That's not a selling point for most people. So, yeah, I think it's interesting, but no.
It's not like how some countries in Europe have, where it's not just, maybe there are two parties that kind of dominate, but there's definitely other parties that have seats. They have their say. They work with other parties or whatever, and they kind of have a coalition. They sort of work together and kind of do what they're going to do in their country. But here in America, it's basically you're either a Republican or a Democrat, and for the vast majority of Americans, that's how they'll see it. They won't, if they see like other options, they'll just be like, well, what? And I know it's like a tired argument that libertarians hear, but when they hear, well, I just be wasting my vote away, a lot of people would think that, because, well, if I vote for the libertarian, even though I'm more of a Democrat, but I like what the libertarian's saying, the Republican might win. And I don't like Republicans.
Sure. And the easiest way around that is to not get into races necessarily that are going to be contentious like that. Why are you, if you have a presidential ticket that's going to be split by a few million votes, why are you going to get in that race? Especially if you're mathematically impossible to win. Like, you're a party that's never won a federal race. Why are you running in that? Why are you not running in races where it's majority Republican and you can eke out the Democrat? So you're on the ticket. So you're a valid voice on the ballot. So you're actually covered by the press because they have to cover the opposition. Run in a race against the Democrats where no Republican runs, and run in that race. And that way you're not being accused of stealing votes because there is no opposition party. I mean, that would be the way to do that. But instead, it's always like, we're going to run for president. And you're like, and then what? And then we're going to run for president. Right. And what's your plan after that? And then we're going to run for president. Like, oh, my, come on. I mean, so like I said earlier, like if they ran in my assembly seat, California Assembly, they would be guaranteed in the general election. They would get news coverage just by virtue of being on the ballot. There are several seats across the state that are like that in California. There are several seats like that across the country. And that would be a great way to focus. Again, I'm not part of the LP. I can't tell them what to do. But I think that if you want to get away from the, you're just stealing votes from so-and-so, which is, it's a BS argument, don't get me wrong, but people do think that way. They really do think that my vote could sway. It's a with swing vote with the Kevin Costner. My vote could sway the election, even though I live in a blue state that's going to go completely the opposite direction. It's like, my vote could swing the election, so I can't throw it away. Convince people in California to not vote for the Republican. Holy, your state's not going to go red anyways. Why don't you give another voice? Why don't you give a finger to the Republican Party that doesn't do anything for you here? Run in those areas where there isn't that third party opposition thing. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's fun to talk about, but
yeah. So I mean, whatever happens is going to happen, obviously, and if Dave does decide to run, or if all that happens, then good luck, and I hope it works out. However, whatever that looks like, if you are able to sway more people to the quote liberty message or whatever, then I would applaud you, and I'm happy for you that happens and all that. What that means for the long term, who knows, and how it's going to change people's minds, I don't know. But I think that's definitely something that they're going to have to think about, because if, and like I said earlier, like Dave, in my opinion, is quite possibly definitely in the top of messengers for the like the liberty movement, or whatever you want to call it. But then once he's out, then what? Like who's the next person to come up? So that's again, thinking about the future is something that they have to
Right.
kind of,
I wouldn't even worry so much about who's the next person. I would worry about what their plan is, because so the Mises Caucus, let's assume they take over the party at the end of May. Awesome. Let's say that Angela McArdle becomes chair, which I hope she does. She's a great person. I like her a lot. And the Mises Caucus does run somebody like Smith or Spike Cohen or whomever. The question shouldn't be who's the next messenger after them necessarily. The question should be, how can they effectively move the needle towards liberty? I don't care about the Libertarian Party. I don't care what their vote threshold is. I don't care what their donor status is. I care about how much does this country or how much does my state move towards liberty. And that's, I think, what needs to be the focus, instead of how much fundraising do we have? How many paid positions can we have in our party or our caucus or whatever? It's how many people are we moving towards these things in the aggregate. And if they have an answer for that, awesome. I hope they figure it out. They have 2 years until the presidential line. If any libertarian has answers, I would love to hear them, because again, Libertarian Party abandoned my state. 320 million people in America, 40 million of them are in California. More people live if my county was its own state, we would be the 25th most populous state. Like, nobody's running. So if they have an answer for that, or how to solve that, then awesome. I hope they do. I hope they figure it out, and I wish them all the best. But until they can answer questions like mine, questions like yours, questions like your average voters, doesn't seem like it's very utilitarian, or very had much utility. Oh, we don't want to use utilitarian there. Have much utility.
Yeah, I mean, if the Mises Caucus does take control, then use that power, because apparently power is like this evil word that they don't like. Like, that's the whole point. You're taking over a party. Then what? You gotta take power. You gotta do something within that party to maybe try and help with the Republican Party. I don't know. It's whatever. It's all this. Blah, you know what I mean? And look, you said it in your video that you were talking about, that we started here with this episode, and I mean, for the most part, it's probably true. And you said, and you kind of also said it a little bit as well, where you said the LP is a party that's been around for over half a century, and the marketplace of ideas seems to have soundly rejected them. The marketplace of ideas, isn't that something that I hear a lot of liberty? In the market, we get the marketplace of ideas. If we could just let them hear our ideas, then they would just be like, oh wow, I never even knew. Well, and I know like the party is just one part of it, but that's a lot of people. That all they know about libertarians is the Libertarian Party.
Right. The word libertarian is synonymous with the Libertarian Party. People assume when I say I say I'm quasi-libertarian, because I'm not a doctrinaire libertarian. I have a lot of wrong think ideas even within that ideology. But I have a taxationist death flag behind me. People see that on TikTok or whatever, and they immediately run in to start screaming about my roads or my infrastructure or my police or whatever. And that's that thing where there is this immediate visceral opposition to sort of a foundational belief within liberty. The idea of there's no such thing as a free lunch and all of that. Like, people viscerally disagree with that. And you don't see a ton of people coming to defense of those basic ideas, the basic premises behind these things. And so if the marketplace of ideas largely has resounded liberty, or sorry, resoundingly rebuffed liberty, what do we do to fix that? I think that's why a lot of people get disenfranchised with the Libertarian Party, because the party is worried about being a political party. They're worried about power within the party structure, how they work within the government structure, how they work within elections and all of that. And that takes away to many people from messaging about liberty, because when you start talking about, well, how do we get to 5%? And stop talking about, well, how do we stop these mask mandates? Not that you can't do two things at once, but you're going to have to prioritize. A lot of people are going to side with liberty, those who are inclined towards liberty at least, then side with, intra-fighting, side with nonsense, talking about Robert's Rules of Order to arguing about Robert's Rules of Order, that sort of thing. So yeah, I think there's a chance there. I think we have people who can speak to stuff, but Yeah, like I said, like you brought up the marketplace of I said the marketplace of ideas has seemingly rejected liberty. That needs to be the biggest push of how do we fix that. I put this up contentiously because I actually just needed a spot to fill my wall. That's not true. It's like it just fit and I needed something there. But yeah, taxation is theft because it's one of those statements that just gets under people's skin. And you can just have a conversation like, well, hold on, why do you think it's not? Well, hold on, let's discuss this. Let's get into it. Let's get into the details behind it. Why do you think that? And you can try to have conversations with good faith actors, obviously. But if that triggers a ton of people, what does that tell you about what the masses think about something? You know, it's a tough battle. It's a tough row to sow.
Yeah, and talking about that with the marketplace of ideas and how liberty's been soundly rejected. Just look what happened with, like you're saying, with the masks and the vaccines. There were everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people were basically taking what the press was telling them, what the CDC and all the Faucis of the world were telling them. And there were libertarians, and we named them, that were really good on this, saying, why this is dumb, why are you doing this? But at the end of the day, it didn't really matter because still people, a lot of people got the vaccine because they needed to keep working because they had no choice, or they had to get the vaccine because, well, my family's doing it and I feel obligated to. And I know there's some people that didn't do it and they got a lot of tension with their families and all that stuff, and that's really unfortunate. But basically what I'm trying to say is that a lot of people just kind of took that and they weren't thinking about liberty. They were just thinking about, well, if they say I have to get the vaccine to do the things that I need to do or that I want to do, then I'm going to do it. And another line that I'll say about that that I heard from one Pete Quinones recently. He said, "Some people's idea of freedom is getting that third shot." And when I heard that, I was like, man, that really hit the nail on the head because a lot of people felt that way. Not just on the left. It was also on the right too. There are some people on the right who are like, I gotta get the vaccine. I have to.
It's the only way we'll go back to normal. I mean,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
that's a fundamental problem where you have people who have a completely different definition of what liberty or freedom means. I mean, you talk to people in Europe and they think freedom means freedom to pursue my own hobbies and interests. It's freedom from having to pay for my medical bills. It's freedom from having to pay for school. It's freedom from having to work full time. That's what they think freedom means. It's sort of freedom from personal responsibility. So when you start throwing words around like liberty and freedom, you have to baseline it. What does that mean? You get into problems where if you try to appeal to too many people, you end up like Joe Jorgensen's media team telling everybody they need to be anti-racist, which is just completely off point for the Libertarian Party. So it ends up being that problem of some people don't care about esoteric liberty. Some people don't care about, well, a perfect government would have, there'd be no government and everything would be, anarcho-Capistan or whatever, and it'd all be awesome. Most people can't see that. Most people can't see 6 months down the road, 2 years down the road. They're worried about if they're going to make their bills right now. And I think if I had to say one thing to anybody in the liberty world is that stop screaming at everybody that they're statists. I mean, that's the big
Yeah.
thing is that everybody came to liberty from somewhere, and people do make bad decisions. I know plenty of people who were pushing for the mask mandates and the vaxes and everything else, and then they finally got the data and they're like, oh, maybe I was just blind to it. Cool. It's a redemption story. Maybe we can bring them in or whatever. But, I don't know. I think there's so many people that can be reached with what a libertarian might think is liberty, what somebody like a Thomas Massey would think is freedom, somebody who might be receptive to the brilliant arguments in economics in one lesson. I mean, that book's from 1947. Be nice if people actually read it. Be great. I sort of have this joke about the Mises Caucus. I wish more people would read Human Action and not just use it as a hashtag. But it's that thing where we have in the liberty world, liberty adjacent world, there's a lot of great ideas, a lot of great points, a lot of great paths towards freedom. And I'd like to see more people work together and be like, oh, cool, cool, cool. Yeah, I'm not a member of the Libertarian Party. Awesome for you. That's great. I wish Angela the best. I hope she wins this chair. I would actually consider to going to Reno if it wasn't an 8-hour drive because it'd be fun to go. But I wish him the best. It's not for me. but I'm not gonna, crap. I'm gonna crap all over it from the outside of like, hey, this is what I think the problems are. You should fix these things, and they can take it or leave it. You want to be an agorist? Awesome, go do that. You want to be a homesteader? Cool, go do that. How can you bring more liberty into the world? Awesome. And I think once the people figure out sort of the big tent outside of the party, we'll all be better off, and it'd be awesome. But that's just me.
Yep, and it's a good way to end it. So, Josh, let everyone know where they can find you and your work, and we'll get out of here.
So I use a username Hourly Struggle. I'm on most of the social medias. I don't use all of them, but I'm mostly on TikTok, Patreon, and Twitter to a point, and then YouTube. If you don't like YouTube, my videos auto-sync to Rumble and Odyssey as well. And that's about it.
All right. Well, thanks again, Josh, for coming on. And thank you for watching and listening. And we'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.